It was a bright Saturday morning at Hale Aviation Center, a private airfield that gleamed like a billionaire's playground. Luxury cars lined the tarmac, cameras flashed, and laughter echoed as business magnates and celebrities mingled beneath the sun. The event's host, Richard Hale, a self-absorbed CEO of an aerospace corporation, strutted proudly beside his brand-new luxury helicopter, the crown jewel of his collection. Among the invited guests stood Steven Seagal, the legendary action star. Dressed in his trademark black shades and calm demeanor, he watched Richard entertain the crowd with his overconfidence and sharp tongue. While champagne glasses clinked, a lone janitor worked silently in the background, Eli, a middle-aged man in a faded blue uniform, pushing a mop bucket along the edge of the hangar. His movements were calm, steady, almost graceful, the kind of discipline that only comes from years of something greater than cleaning floors. But to Richard, Eli was invisible until he saw him near the helicopter. "Hey you!" Richard barked, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Careful with that mop. Unless you want to pay for a scratch on this beauty, it's worth more than your whole life." Laughter erupted among the guests. Some smirked. Others looked away uncomfortably. Eli froze, then looked up slowly. His eyes were calm, not angry, not hurt, just steady. "Sorry, sir. I'll be careful," he said softly. Richard chuckled and turned back to Seagal. "You see, Steven? Some people are just born to clean up after greatness." Seagal didn't laugh. He simply folded his arms, studying Eli quietly. Something about the man's composure didn't sit right. Eli went back to work, silently mopping the concrete floor as the crowd moved on. Yet the brief exchange left an odd tension in the air. Seagal's instincts whispered that this wasn't an ordinary janitor, because there was something in Eli's posture, the way he stood tall, even in silence, that carried the weight of a man who'd seen more skies and more battles than anyone there could imagine. No one there knew that in just a few minutes. This quiet janitor would leave everyone, and even Steven Seagal, completely speechless. The late morning heat shimmered across the tarmac as the guests gathered around the sleek silver helicopter. Richard Hale beamed with pride, brushing his tailored suit as if it were made of gold. The helicopter, his latest acquisition, glimmered under the sunlight like a trophy. "This, ladies and gentlemen," Richard announced, tapping the side of the aircraft, "is the Hale Falcon X9 custom-built. Top of the line, fully automated flight system. It's the finest bird money can buy. Only trained experts know how to handle her." The crowd clapped politely. Steven Seagal gave a small nod, still watching quietly, still studying Eli in the distance. Richard's assistant whispered, "Sir, the reporters are ready for your photo op." He smirked. "Let's give them a show." He stepped in front of the cameras, spreading his arms dramatically. "Who among you thinks they could fly something like this?" he called out with mock enthusiasm. Silence. The guests exchanged awkward glances until Richard's eyes caught sight of movement near the hangar door. It was Eli again, carrying a bucket and rag. A cruel grin spread across Richard's face. "You there, janitor?" Eli turned, a little startled but composed. "Yes, sir." Richard's tone turned playful but sharp enough to cut glass. "You think you could fly a helicopter like this?" The crowd chuckled, sensing mockery on the way. Eli gave a modest shrug. "Can't say I've tried, sir." Richard laughed, shaking his head dramatically. "Tell you what," he said loudly so everyone could hear. "If you can start this helicopter and get it off the ground, safely, I'll give you my company." He paused, grinning. "And my daughter's hand in marriage." The guests roared with laughter. Some clapped. One woman gasped. Even the camera crew joined in. Eli blinked, unsure if the man was serious. "Are you sure about that, sir?" he asked calmly. "Oh, I'm very sure," Richard said, puffing his chest. "But I wouldn't worry. Mopping floors is a safer career for you." The laughter grew louder. Seagal's expression didn't change. He tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing. Something about Eli's unbothered expression made him curious. There was no embarrassment, no anger. Just silence and control. Eli slowly placed the rag back into his bucket. Then he looked at Richard and said in a calm, confident tone, "If that's your offer, sir." "I accept." The laughter stopped. Heads turned. Someone whispered, "He's not serious, right?" Richard burst out laughing. "You're serious?" You actually think you can fly this? Eli simply smiled. You said if I can fly it safely, you'd keep your word. That's all I'm agreeing to. Richard waved him over with exaggerated gestures. All right, let's do this, folks. Everyone, record this. Our janitor's about to give us some comedy. The guests crowded around with their phones. Seagal stepped closer, folding his arms. Eli approached the helicopter slowly, respectfully, like someone greeting an old friend. He ran his hand lightly over the side of the cockpit. The way he touched it made Seagal's eyes narrow even more. It wasn't random curiosity. It was muscle memory. Richard smirked. You even know where the door handle is, son? Eli opened it without hesitation. The latch clicked perfectly under his fingers. He stepped inside and began inspecting the control panel. A murmur spread through the crowd. Richard frowned. He's guessing, he's just pretending. But Seagal knew better. He'd seen real pilots before, real soldiers. And the way Eli's eyes scanned the switches, the way his hands paused briefly before moving to each control, it was exact. It was trained. Richard called out, "Be careful, that's a $5 million piece of art." Eli didn't answer. His hand rested on the throttle, his other on the cyclic stick. He flipped a switch, 1, 2, 3 in sequence, and the faint hum of the turbine filled the air. The laughter faded. The blades began to turn, slowly, surely. The camera phone started shaking as guests gasped. Richard's fake grin collapsed into panic. Wait, how the hell did he? Seagal smirked. Looks like your janitor's full of surprises. Richard shouted, "Shut it off. You'll crash it." But Eli's face remained calm, focused. His movements were precise. No hesitation, no chaos. The helicopter's engine roared to life, the ground beneath them vibrating. People backed away instinctively. Eli adjusted the controls gently, and the blades reached full speed, the helicopter ready to lift. Inside the cockpit, Eli took a deep breath and smiled faintly to himself. "Been a while," he whispered. The chopper rose 6 feet off the ground, steady, perfect balance, then hovered in place. The crowd screamed, phones flashing, eyes wide in disbelief. Richard could only stand frozen, mouth open, unable to speak. Seagal's jaw tightened. He muttered under his breath, "That's not luck. That's training." And then Eli lowered the craft, landing it as smoothly as a leaf touching water. The blade slowed to silence. He stepped out quietly, wiping his hands on his uniform. "There you go, sir," he said calmly. "Didn't scratch it." The guests erupted into shocked murmurs. The CEO's face turned pale. Even Seagal looked impressed. Something extraordinary had just happened, and everyone could feel it. Have you ever seen someone underestimate the wrong person? Comment below. Also, tell us which country and city you're watching this story from. We love seeing where our audience is around the world. The airfield was dead silent. Not a laugh, not a whisper. Only the faint ticking sound of the helicopter's cooling engine. The same crowd that had mocked Eli seconds ago now stood frozen in disbelief. Eli stepped out of the cockpit and adjusted his sleeves as if he had just finished wiping a counter, not flying a multi-million-dollar aircraft. His expression remained calm, unbothered, almost detached. The world had shifted around him, but he hadn't changed one bit. Richard Hale, red-faced and speechless, struggled to find his voice. How did you... Who are you? He stammered. Eli gave a small smile. You said if I could fly it, you'd keep your word. I just wanted to make sure we understood each other clearly. The crowd erupted in whispers. One of the guests muttered, "Did he really just say that?" Another added, "That was perfect control. Not beginner's luck." Steven Seagal finally stepped forward, his calm yet powerful voice breaking the silence. "That was a textbook lift and landing," he said, looking at Eli with curious respect. "You don't learn that from YouTube tutorials." A nervous chuckle rippled through the group. Eli just nodded politely, avoiding attention. He picked up his cleaning rag and went back to wiping the helicopter's landing gear as if nothing had happened. That quiet humility somehow made it even more impressive. Richard tried to laugh it off. Okay, fine. Lucky guess. Maybe you've seen too many movies." His attempt at humor fell flat. No one laughed. One of the engineers from Richard's company stepped closer. "Sir, that wasn't luck. He knew every control, every sequence, even the safety override." Richard's smile vanished again. "That's impossible. He's just a janitor." Seagal crossed his arms. "Maybe you should stop seeing people as just anything." The crowd turned toward the movie star, who now stared at Eli like a man solving a mystery. "What did you say your name was?" Seagal asked. Eli looked up briefly. "Just Eli, sir." There was something in his tone, modest yet heavy, like a man carrying a history he didn't care to share. Richard, desperate to regain control, barked, "Security! Check this man's ID. I want to know where he came from." The guards hesitated. No one wanted to move against the man who'd just flown the boss's helicopter better than the boss's own pilot. Richard shouted louder. "Now." Eli sighed softly, pulling a worn-out wallet from his pocket. He handed it to the nearest guard without protest. "No problem," he said. As the guard flipped it open, his expression changed instantly. He turned pale, then handed the wallet back with both hands, eyes wide. Richard frowned. "Well, what does it say?" The guard swallowed hard. "Sir, I think you should see this yourself." Richard snatched the wallet and read the ID aloud. "Colonel Elijah Cruz, U.S. Air Force Special Operations? Retired?" Gasps echoed through the airfield. Several guests started murmuring again. Seagal blinked slowly, recognition dawning on his face. "Wait, Cruz? Colonel Eli Cruz?" Eli gave a humble nod. "Used to be, sir. A long time ago." Now everyone was staring at him. Cameras zoomed in. Phones were raised again. Not to mock this time, but to capture what was quickly turning into a legendary moment. Richard staggered back a step, all color draining from his face. You're that Eli Cruz? The pilot from Operation Silent Sky?" Eli just smiled faintly. "I prefer not to talk about that." Seagal exhaled in disbelief. "That mission saved hundreds of soldiers. You're a damn hero, man." The crowd broke into applause. Some guests whistled, others clapped respectfully. The CEO, however, could barely breathe. For the first time, the mighty Richard Hale was completely powerless in front of the very man he'd ridiculed. Eli, ever humble, gave a short nod to the crowd. "I appreciate it. But today, I'm just doing my job. Everyone's got a role to play." The guests fell quiet again, moved by his dignity. Seagal stepped closer, speaking quietly but firmly. "I've met warriors, and I've met actors who pretend to be warriors. You, my friend, are the real thing." Eli chuckled softly. "I'm just someone who's learned that respect shouldn't depend on uniforms." Behind them, Richard stood frozen, unable to look anyone in the eye. The once proud CEO, who moments ago had mocked a janitor, was now standing before a living legend. If you were standing there, would you have stepped in to defend Eli or waited to see what happened? Be honest, type your answer in the comments. The applause slowly faded, replaced by stunned silence. The airfield, once buzzing with arrogant laughter and casual chatter, now felt sacred, as if everyone present had unknowingly witnessed history unfold. Eli stood there, still in his worn janitor uniform, with patches that had faded from years of washing. He looked nothing like the war hero whose name echoed in military circles. And yet there he was, calm, grounded, and somehow above it all. Steven Seagal stepped closer, his usually stoic face showing a rare sign of admiration. "Colonel Cruz, I've heard about you," he said quietly, so only those nearby could hear. "They said you flew through a storm no one else would dare cross. Saved an entire squadron." Eli gave a small, respectful smile. "That was a long time ago, sir. Right place, right time." But the crowd wasn't letting it go that easily. Whispers began to rise like a wave. "That's the colonel who disappeared after the mission. He was awarded the Silver Star, wasn't he? Why is he working as a janitor?" Richard Hale could feel the eyes of every single person turning on him. The same crowd that had cheered his arrogance minutes earlier now watched him with quiet judgment. His confident grin was gone, replaced by an expression of disbelief and embarrassment. Trying to regain control, Richard forced a laugh. "Okay, so you're who you say you are. Maybe you used to fly. But come on, you're a janitor now. You don't belong here with investors and executives." The crowd murmured in disapproval. Even Seagal frowned. Eli looked up from his rag, his expression still calm. "You're right," he said. "I don't belong above anyone. Not then, not now." Then, turning slightly toward the audience, he added, "But that doesn't mean anyone deserves disrespect for the job they do. When I served, rank didn't matter when lives were on the line. The cook, the mechanic, the medic, every one of them mattered. Maybe if we remembered that, the world would be a little better." His words struck deep. The same people who had laughed earlier were now nodding silently. Steven Seagal broke the silence again. "That's the kind of strength you can't fake," he said, his voice filled with gravity. "Discipline doesn't come from medals, it comes from humility." Eli smiled gently, but his gaze moved toward Richard. "You see, Mr. Hale," he said, "some people think success is measured by what they own, not by what they've given. But someday even the richest man realizes you can't buy respect." The CEO's jaw tightened. He looked furious, but the situation had spun far beyond his control. Cameras were recording, social media was already buzzing, and in a matter of minutes his arrogance would be seen by millions. Trying to defend himself, Richard snapped, "So what, you think you're better than me? Because you flew a few missions decades ago?" Eli shook his head slowly. "No, sir. I don't think I'm better than anyone. But I do think everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, whether they're cleaning a floor or flying a plane." The crowd erupted in applause again. Even Seagal clapped, a proud smirk on his face. Richard's assistant tugged on his sleeve, whispering, "Sir, this is trending already. Someone's live streaming." The CEO's confidence crumbled completely. He stepped back, muttering something about misunderstandings, but the damage was done. His name was now attached to public humiliation, while Eli, the quiet janitor, had become the embodiment of humility and honor. Eli paused, then turned around. "I'm just a man doing what's right," he said. "You don't need fame to do that." Then, looking around the airfield, the jets, the suits, the flashing cameras, he added, "Power makes some people louder, but character, that's what makes someone unforgettable." The audience went quiet again. Even the reporters lowered their microphones, letting his words hang in the air. Seagal nodded, visibly moved. "Well said." For the first time, Richard had no words. His own arrogance had created this moment, and now he was the lesson everyone would remember. As Eli turned to leave, a small boy, one of the guest's children, ran up to him and tugged on his sleeve. "Mister," the boy said shyly, "my dad says you're a hero." Eli crouched down to meet the boy's eyes. "No, son," he said softly. "Heroes are the ones who do good even when no one's watching." The boy smiled. "Then I want to be like you when I grow up." Eli's expression softened. "Then the world's in good hands." He patted the boy's shoulder and walked away, leaving behind a silence that no amount of wealth or ego could fill. As Eli disappeared down the hangar hallway, Steven Seagal followed him, determined to uncover the real story behind this mysterious man. What Seagal learned next would shake even him to the core. The sun began to dip behind the hangars, bathing the airfield in a golden haze. The crowd had slowly dispersed, still whispering about the shocking scene they had just witnessed. The arrogant CEO who mocked a janitor had been humbled, and the so-called janitor turned out to be a decorated Air Force colonel. But one man wasn't ready to leave: Steven Seagal. He walked quietly down the long corridor of maintenance bays until he spotted Eli, still at work. The man who had just silenced a crowd of millionaires was now kneeling beside a bucket, carefully rinsing his mop. "Most people would have been giving interviews by now," Seagal said with a faint smile. Eli looked up, smiling back modestly. "I'm not most people, sir," Seagal nodded. "Clearly." He leaned against the wall, folding his arms. "You could have embarrassed that CEO 10 times worse. You could have revealed your whole record, thrown your medals in his face, but you didn't. Why?" Eli wrung out the mop and looked out through the open hangar doors toward the fading sky. "Because humiliation doesn't teach respect," he said quietly. "It just spreads more ego." Seagal studied him closely, intrigued. "You've seen a lot, haven't you?" Eli gave a small nod. "Enough to know that arrogance doesn't end wars, and neither does pride. The moment you think you're above others, that's when you start losing who you really are." There was a long silence. The distant hum of engines was the only sound. Seagal finally said, "You know, most people out there are going to call you a hero after today." Eli chuckled softly. "I've heard that word thrown around too loosely. Heroes aren't people who get attention. They're the ones who do the right thing when it costs them something." Seagal's expression softened. "You remind me of the kind of men I used to train with," he said. "Real discipline. Real honor. Rare to see that now. Eli shrugged lightly. I just believe in doing my part, sir. After my last mission, I promised myself I'd live simple. Help people quietly. You don't need a uniform to serve. Before Seagal could respond, footsteps echoed behind them. Richard Hale, the CEO, approached hesitantly. His usual confident swagger was gone. He looked smaller, older, humbled. Colonel, Richard began, his voice uncertain. I wanted to apologize. I didn't know who you were. I was... Eli interrupted gently. You don't need to apologize for not knowing me. But maybe you should think about why you felt the need to treat me that way in the first place. Richard froze. The words weren't angry, but they hit harder than any insult. I guess I got carried away, Richard said softly. The company, the money, it changes how you see people. Eli nodded. It does. Until someone reminds you we all start in the same place. The ground. Richard sighed, visibly moved. If you ever want a better position, Colonel, I'll personally make sure. Eli raised a hand politely. Thank you, but I'm right where I need to be. The men who clean these hangars, the techs, the crew, they're my people now. They remind me what real work looks like. Seagal smiled, clearly impressed. You know, if the world had more people like you, maybe we wouldn't need movies about heroes. Eli chuckled. Or maybe the world just needs to listen more. The three men stood quietly for a moment, the golden light fading behind them. Then Eli picked up his mop again, ready to finish his shift. But Richard stopped him. Can I ask one last thing? He said. Why this job? A man like you could be anywhere. Eli looked down for a moment before answering. When I came back from service, I visited one of my bases. The janitor there, an old man, told me, You've flown above clouds, son. But the real peace is found when you can work with your feet on the ground. I didn't understand it then. Now I do. His voice softened. You can't serve people if you think you're above them. Seagal nodded slowly, visibly moved by the wisdom in those words. Richard was silent, ashamed, yet grateful. Finally, he said quietly, Thank you for teaching me something I didn't even know I'd forgotten. Eli smiled kindly. Just remember it next time you look at someone and decide their worth in a single glance. As Richard turned to leave, the sound of his footsteps felt heavier, more human. Seagal watched him go, then turned back to Eli. You know, this story's gonna go everywhere, right? The world's hungry for moments like this, real humility, real strength. Eli sighed. Maybe they'll see more than just a headline. Maybe they'll remember to respect the people they walk past every day. Seagal grinned. That's a message worth sharing. As Eli cleaned the last bit of oil from the hangar floor, the golden light faded into dusk. For him, it was just another day's work. But for everyone else, it was the day a janitor reminded the world what true greatness looks like. The video of Eli's humble yet powerful moment spreads online. But what happens next takes everyone by surprise. Even the military reaches out, and Steven Seagal finds himself making a public statement about Eli's legacy. By the next morning, the internet had exploded. The video from the airfield, showing a janitor flawlessly flying a helicopter, revealing his true identity as Colonel Elijah Cruz, and humbling a billionaire CEO, had racked up over 50 million views overnight. The hashtags, I respect Eli and the janitor pilot, were trending across every major platform. Clips were everywhere, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. People from every corner of the world were posting reactions, saying the same thing. This is what real class looks like. A true hero doesn't need fame, just integrity. He didn't embarrass the CEO, he educated him. At the Hale Aviation office, Richard Hale sat behind his desk, staring at his computer screen in silence. Every news outlet had covered the story. CNN, BBC, Fox News, even military publications. His face, frozen in the moment of mockery, had become a symbol of arrogance. Meanwhile, Eli was back at work. Same uniform, same mop, same quiet composure. One of the younger employees ran up to him holding his phone. Sir, you're everywhere. They're calling you the man who humbled a millionaire. Even Steven Seagal posted about you. Eli chuckled lightly. That's kind of him, but I'm no hero. Just someone who had a long day. He continued mopping, unbothered by the chaos his story had caused. Across town, Steven Seagal was on a morning talk show. The host leaned forward excitedly. "Steven, you were right there when it happened. What was it like seeing that unfold?" Seagal smiled faintly. "It reminded me what strength really looks like. That man, Eli, didn't just fly a helicopter. He lifted the dignity of everyone who's ever been underestimated." The audience applauded. The host nodded. "So you'd say it changed how people should treat others?" Seagal looked straight into the camera. "Absolutely. Respect isn't earned by money or fame. It's earned by character." Eli showed that in a way no one could ignore. Clips of that interview instantly went viral again, amplifying the story's reach. People from all walks of life, teachers, mechanics, students, even soldiers, shared their own experiences of being judged or overlooked. And everywhere, one question echoed: what would you have done if you were there? Engagement break. Comment below. If you were one of the guests at that airfield, would you have spoken up for Eli or stayed silent? Let's be honest, what would you have done? By the afternoon, Eli was trending globally. Journalists began camping outside the airfield, hoping to get a comment. Military officials reached out wanting to reconnect. Even the Philippine government, where Eli had trained part of his career, issued a public salute honoring his service. But Eli stayed out of the spotlight. He quietly slipped out after work, avoiding cameras, driving home in his old pickup truck. That evening, his small house in the suburbs was filled with warmth. His wife Maria had cooked dinner, simple rice, vegetables, and fish. The TV played softly in the background, showing news anchors praising his humility. Maria smiled. "You're famous again, my love." Eli shook his head, laughing gently. "Fame comes and goes. Peace stays where it's quiet." She reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "Still, I'm proud of you. You didn't just fly that helicopter. You reminded people what respect means." Eli smiled softly. "I just hope people remember the message, not the man." Suddenly, a knock came at the door. When Eli opened it, he found Steven Seagal standing there, still dressed in black, wearing his signature calm smile. "I figured you'd be avoiding the spotlight," Seagal said. Eli laughed. "You figured right." Seagal handed him a small envelope. "A few of us, veterans, pilots, and friends, wanted to do something. Nothing fancy." Inside the envelope was a certificate, lifetime recognition of service and integrity, presented to Colonel Elijah Cruz. Beneath it, handwritten by Seagal himself, were the words, "For proving that true strength is silent and true heroes are humble." Eli stared at it for a long moment, his eyes glistening. "Thank you, sir. But I didn't do anything special." Seagal shook his head. "That's what makes it special." They stood there quietly, two men of vastly different worlds but the same code of honor. As Seagal turned to leave, he paused at the doorway. "You know, Eli, you may not wear your medals, but you've earned something rarer, the respect of the world." Eli looked down, smiling. "Respect's enough for me, sir." Seagal gave a firm nod. "Then I'll make sure they remember that." The next day, Hale Aviation made a public statement. Richard Hale himself appeared on camera, visibly remorseful. "I learned something important this week," he began. "I learned that humility is worth more than any company, any helicopter, or any title. I disrespected a man who deserves nothing but honor. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure my company never does that again." His apology went viral too, not for his image, but because people saw genuine remorse. Eli, however, didn't react publicly. He simply showed up to work the next morning. Same uniform, same calm smile. When reporters shouted questions, he gave just one short answer before heading inside. "You don't have to be important to make a difference. You just have to treat people right." And with that, the world's most famous janitor went back to doing what he always did best, keeping the ground clean while reminding everyone else to keep their hearts that way too. As Eli's story continues to spread, schools, soldiers, and even CEOs start quoting his words. But what happens when Steven Seagal invites Eli to stand beside him at a major event, and Eli's final message to the world leaves everyone in tears? 2 weeks had passed since the world discovered who Eli the janitor truly was. Colonel Elijah Cruz, the humble war hero who had taught an unforgettable lesson about respect. His story had crossed every border, every language, and every platform. Teachers were discussing it in classrooms. Veterans were quoting his words in interviews. Even CEOs had begun starting meetings with a new mantra. Treat everyone with dignity. You never know who you're talking to. But for Eli, life hadn't changed. He still woke up early, drank his coffee black, and drove his old pickup to the airfield. He still cleaned the hangars like always, quiet, focused, and unseen. One morning, as he arrived for work, the manager stopped him. "Colonel, there's someone waiting for you outside." Eli stepped out, and there stood Steven Seagal dressed in a dark suit, his familiar calm aura surrounding him. Cameras and reporters lingered in the distance, but Seagal waved them back. "This wasn't for show, Eli," Seagal began, smiling. "There's a veterans event tonight. I'm speaking there, but I'd like you to join me. The theme is honor beyond rank, and frankly, you embody that better than anyone I know." Eli shook his head gently. "I'm not much for stages, sir." Seagal chuckled. "Neither was I until I realized people need to see what humility looks like. Not hear about it, see it. You've already done that once. Do it again for the right reason." Eli hesitated for a moment, then sighed softly. "All right, but no fancy introductions," Seagal grinned. "No promises." That evening, the National Veterans Gala Hall was packed. Military officers, celebrities, entrepreneurs, and students filled every seat. Cameras lined the back wall, broadcasting live to millions. Steven Seagal stepped onto the stage to loud applause. After a brief introduction, he said, "Tonight, I want to introduce not a soldier, not a celebrity, but a man who reminded the world that humility isn't weakness, it's power in its purest form." He gestured toward the side of the stage. "Please welcome Colonel Elijah Cruz." Eli walked out in his simple gray jacket. No medals, no ribbons, just the same calm presence that had captivated the world. The applause was thunderous. He stepped up to the microphone, waited for the crowd to quiet, and began to speak softly, but with a voice that carried weight. "I'm not used to speeches," he said, smiling faintly, "but I've learned something over the years. Life will always test who you are, not by what you have, but by how you treat others." The room was silent. Cameras zoomed in as Eli continued. "Once I thought greatness was about medals and missions. Later I thought it was about sacrifice. But now I think it's simpler than that. Greatness is being kind when no one's watching. Respecting people who can do nothing for you. That's real power." He paused, looking out over the audience. Some were already wiping their eyes. "I didn't plan to become a janitor," Eli went on. "But every day I worked with people who reminded me of something my old commander once said. If you ever forget what it means to serve, go back and sweep the floor where you started." A quiet murmur rippled through the crowd. A deep, emotional connection to his words. Eli smiled gently. "We live in a time where people chase status, likes, and titles. But one act of respect, one moment of humility can travel farther than any fame ever could." I didn't teach the world that. The world taught it to itself. I just happened to be holding the mop. The audience stood, erupting into applause, a standing ovation that lasted nearly 2 minutes. Seagal clapped hardest of all, pride shining in his eyes. When the applause faded, Seagal joined him on stage. He leaned in and said quietly, "You just reminded the world what it forgot." Eli smiled. "I just cleaned a little dust off its memory." The crowd laughed warmly through their tears. Cameras flashed. The image of Eli and Seagal standing side by side, one an action legend, the other a quiet hero, became one of the most shared photos of the year. That night, news headlines read, "The janitor who cleaned the world's conscience." If you believe respect should never depend on status, type honor in the comments, and share this story to remind someone that greatness isn't about power, it's about heart.